I uploaded a short a while ago talking about how important punch needle sample squares are, but it occurred to me that I gave absolutely zero demonstration on how to actually make punch needle sample squares. I bought a bunch of yarn the other day, so this is a great opportunity to show you how to make these. So I have some leftover monk's cloth here from a previous punch needle project, and I'm using a 5-inch Morgan's no-slip hoop, just because it's the only hoop that'll fit small scraps like these. I'm going to stretch out my monk's cloth, and the white lines here are a great way to make sure that it is straight. So here we go. It's not perfectly straight, but whatever. So what we'll do now is draw a square that we'll be punching into. You can make it whatever size you want. I don't really measure my sample squares by centimeters or inches. I measure by the holes in the cloth. So my sample squares are usually 26 by 26 holes. I'm going to take my Sharpie and draw the square. You don't need a ruler for this, you can just move your Sharpie through the holes like this to end up with a perfectly even and straight square. It doesn't look like it right now, but I'm going to re-stretch it on my hoop, and now you can see that it's a lot straighter. Now I can grab my yarn and start punching. I'm going to unravel a bunch of it so that we have some slack and get started. This is the Oxford 10 fine punch needle, and when I make sample squares, I like making them for every single punch needle I have. Because yarn obviously looks different when you're punching shorter versus taller loops. It's kind of tedious, so you definitely don't have to do this. You can just do it with the punch needle that you use the most. Up to you. When you're using a fine punch needle, you're basically all clear to punch in every single hole of a row, like what I'm doing right now, at least for shorter loop heights. And if you mess up, just lift your needle to pull out the stitches and re-punch. Now, the reason that we make sample squares is so that we can see how our yarn sits in the monk's cloth with different loop heights and whatnot. And you might be thinking, Brenda, doesn't all yarn just sit the same? No, you sweet summer child, it does not. 2 different brands might make weight for yarn, but one brand's definition of what weight for is might be a bit thicker than another brand's. It helps to see how different yarns sit before you dive into a big project. So what we're going to do is we're just going to end with the exact same stitch that we started in, and take a look at the back, and the stitches look great. You might have to poke around your loops a little like I'm doing right now to make sure that they look okay, but hey, you have to do that for every single punch needle piece anyways. Oh, wait, did I start on a corner? Oh my god, I totally started on a corner. Actually, you know what? This is a great learning opportunity here. So you're not supposed to start on a corner. I mean, you can, but it'll just be a lot more visible on the other side. I would recommend starting in the middle instead. This is just my habits coming through. Now, I'm leaving a gap of 1 hole on the inside of my square. I just found that punching in every single row makes your stitches look overcrowded, but experiment with the yarns that you have. Some of them will look great if you punch them into every single row. Don't worry too much about gaps if you have any, because when we look at the front here, it looks perfectly fine. That's a super important part about punch needling. Everyone kind of just seems to forget. Do what feels right to you. And what we're doing here is we're just doing a spiral. So we're punching around and around until we get to the center. I have done rows up and down as well, and these 2 are generally the most common ways to do filler stitches in punch needling, but you can definitely experiment. I have seen other examples of people filling in their punch needle pieces using circles or even diagonals. So once we're done punching, we're going to snip off our yarn and then poke it through to the other side. We'll snip off these long tails, and we're done with 1 square. What we'll do now is make another sample square using the Oxford 10 regular punch needle. How will we do this? Well, we will just double up our yarn. Doing this basically mimics the weight of bulky yarn, which is normally used with Oxford regular punch needles. I double up my yarn all the time, so I find that it helps to make sample squares doing this as well. So generally, a safe bet when punching with an Oxford regular is to make your border stitches in every other hole. And now for the inside, I'll skip a row here again, and what I'll do is I'll go into every 3rd hole. This is just to make sure that our square doesn't get overcrowded with stitches. And see, if you look at these stitches, you can't even tell that they're made up of 2 yarns, at least on the back. You might notice that I'm making slightly smaller stitches when I'm starting out in some of the corners. There is a reason for this. You'll want to stagger your filler stitches and make them stack like bricks. Practicing this on a sample square is a great idea. The reason that we do this is because if your stitches are all lined up, your punch needle piece will look stiff and factory made, which is a big no-no. So we're done with our second square, and let's compare our sample squares for the Oxford 10 regular and fine. With the regular, more space has been filled in, you can see less of the monk's cloth, but when you turn it over to the other side, they both look pretty similar. The only disadvantage of doubling up your yarn is that you have more ends to cut off, but between you and me, I like cutting off ends. I just find it really fun and satisfying. So what I'll do next is I'll finish making the sample squares for the rest of my needle heights, and then I'll show you the next steps to making your punch needle sample squares. Okay, wait, hold on. I'm just gonna interrupt real quick to say thank you. People are actually listening to me and subscribing. Thank you so much. Welcome. But I think you all started listening and watching a little more than I expected. And because of this, I have an even less percentage of viewers subscribed to me. How does this happen? How does this happen to me? Is this what they mean by suffering from success? If it is, I don't want to suffer, so if you're enjoying this video, you should like and subscribe and click on the bell for notifications. Here are all of my squares. We've got the 10 fine and 10 regular, as well as the 9 fine and regular and 8 fine and regular. One thing to remember with Oxford punch needles is that the lower the number, the taller the loop height. So the 8 and 9 make taller loops than the 10. And as you can see, I made bigger filler stitches for the 8 and 9 fine needles. I went in every other hole just because I felt that the square would be too overcrowded if I went in every single hole. So when you're punching your sample squares, use your best judgment, keep checking the front of your work, and you can adjust if necessary. What we're going to do now is we're going to steam press our sample squares because all of them are a little curvy and we want them to be flattened out. So we'll put them down face up and throw a wet towel on them, and then iron them just like this. I'll keep the iron there for a couple of seconds, and now all of these squares are flattened out. Once they're dry and cooled down, we can glue them. People who've been watching me for a while probably already know this by now, but I hate using glue on my punch needle projects. This felt like the best solution to see my stitches, identify the squares, and avoid fraying. Once I find a better solution that doesn't use glue, I'll probably make a new how-to video. But for now, I'm using fabric glue and my finger to glue a border around my sample squares. And now that the glue is dried, I'm going to use some fray check around the edges to make absolutely sure that none of these squares fray. And just a side note, please don't use your fingers to apply this. Now that the fray check is dried, I'm going to label my sample squares. Some things that I recommend writing down are what punch needle you used, the brand of the yarn, and any modifications that you made to the yarn. For example, I wrote down that I doubled up the yarn for the sample squares made with the Oxford regulars. And with that, we are done the sample squares. So here are the Oxford 8 fine and regular, the 9 fine and regular, the 10 fine and regular, and the 13 and 14, which I punched separately. I hope this was helpful. I kind of just had this on my to-do list, and making the video just felt like a good 2-for-1 idea.